The woman in room 406, it's cake day once again. My story is officially a kindergartner, 5 years, I hope we'll enjoy. Working as the night auditor at popular hotel chain, I was fortunate enough to meet many interesting people. It seemed as though the insomniacs who would leave their rooms at night looking for some company, were always the most interesting of people. In my time there, I learned that everyone has a story to tell, and this one in particular I can never forget. There was an older woman, most likely in her late 60s. She was a retired nurse at the psychiatric institution downtown. Each night she was at the hotel, she would come down to talk to me at the same time, 3:25 a.m. I was always grateful to see her, not only for the amazing stories she had to share, but also it was around that time when I was struggling to stay awake the most. Most nights she would tell me stories about her children or grandchildren, and occasionally she would tell me about past work experiences. Some of her patients were still at the institution, so she was required by law to leave out any identifying details. One night when she had come down, she appeared to be disturbed by something. At this point I had been talking to her for about a month, as her house had flooded and she was placed in our hotel until the repairs could be made. I asked her, "What's wrong?" She hesitated, dazing off into the distance for a few seconds. I could tell she was being haunted by whatever happened to her that day. She eventually came to, then turned to me and said, "Let me tell you about an old patient of mine." I replied, "Sure thing," and then made us a fresh pot of coffee. It was a common practice of ours to move to the lobby couches where it was much more comfortable. We would stay up together, drinking coffee until it was time for me to get breakfast ready for the other guests, and then she would head back up to her room to try and get some rest. There was a man who was transferred to my ward shortly after I started working there. Most days he was very polite and you couldn't even tell that there was something wrong. We each took a sip of our coffee and she continued, "That man passed away last week." I offered her my condolences, then she added, "When I said most days, there were times where he would have these fits of uncontrollable rage. He would spout, while kicking and screaming, seemingly nonsensical phrases, and we would have to restrain and issue sedatives to calm him down." She had never told me anything like this before, and I was intrigued to say the very least. Then she said, "Today, while I was at the store, I heard his voice from behind me saying the usual nonsense, black car, oak tree, yellow jacket. When I turned around I only caught a glimpse of him in the corner of my eye before he disappeared. I thought nothing of it and continued shopping. When I finished, and began loading the groceries in my car, a man wearing a yellow jacket driving a black Camaro stopped next to me and asked where the nearest gas station was. Remembering my former patient's words from before, I was spooked a little bit, but brushed it off as coincidence. I gave the man his directions and he went on his way. Several minutes later, I had finished loading the groceries into my vehicle and started back to the hotel. Traffic was horrendous the entire way. As I was inching my way down the street, I saw police zoom past me. Shortly after, fire truck and ambulance. As I approached the source of the traffic jam, I was horrified. The man from earlier appeared to have lost control of his vehicle and crashed into a tree. An oak tree to be exact. I remember not really knowing what to think about what she told me. I muttered, maybe it was all just a coincidence? She smirked, sensing my empathy before finally agreeing, perhaps. Before we knew it, the alarm I had set for myself to get breakfast ready had sounded. She then took her coffee and headed back to her room for the night. A day or two went by and she appeared to have accepted the events that took place as coincidence and moved on with her life. That was until the following Friday, the last time I would speak to her before my work week was through. When she came down, she had the same horrified look on her face. We sat down, got coffee and began to converse as we usually did. She was quick to tell me, "I was in my room watching TV this morning when I swore I heard his voice again." The voice screamed in the same frantic delusional tone that he once did in the ward, FedEx, 6, cul-de-sac. I then sprung from my bed, searched my entire room and found nothing. As I went to turn off the TV I saw a glimpse of the man on the patio. I started towards the door leading outside and before I got to it, he was gone. At this point I was just as startled as she was, because I knew what she was going to say next. As I was eating my dinner and watching the news, I saw a story of a shooting in Houston. It was a FedEx employee seeking revenge on his ex-wife. This man managed to execute 6 of her family in his pursuit, but was caught before he could find out where she was. The news showed the man's vehicle surrounded by police in a neighborhood cul-de-sac. I had seen this story earlier that night on the lobby TV, as I would spend most of the night watching the news to pass the time. I didn't know what to say. I sat there waiting for her to speak again, and she just went up to her room early that night. I was concerned for her well-being because at this point I saw her as a mother figure to me. After my shift was over, I spent most of the weekend trying to figure out what was going on with that poor woman. I remember thinking, is she just senile? Surely she is just making this up. Despite thinking this, I had not known her to tell a lie. She was always so genuine when we spoke. I looked forward to returning to work to see how she was. Come Monday, she didn't come down like she usually did. I checked our guest list to see if she was still checked in, and sure enough she was. Assuming she needed space, and understandably so, I let her be. She didn't come down again until that Thursday when she had yet another encounter with the man who haunted her. This time she didn't tell me what she has seen or heard. She just tried to make small talk and forget what was going on in her life. I was worried for her, but I respected her want for privacy and I carried on with the meaningless banter that night. Before she went back up to her room, I told her, "I'm worried about you, you know. I'm always here if you need to talk." She turned to me with a half smile and said, "I know you are, and thank you for listening." The next day when I came in for work, the previous front desk clerk had informed me that the guest in room 406 had checked out earlier that day. I was shocked. I couldn't understand why she would leave without telling me. Her insurance company had booked her for another 3 weeks. I thought, where would she go? That night, as I was walking the halls to keep active so I wouldn't doze off, I noticed a piece of paper on the floor by the elevators. I picked it up to throw it away when I noticed it had the woman's handwriting on it. The sloppy nature of the note led me to believe that it was written in a hurry. This concerned me, as I started to fear for her safety. The note read Iron Horse, Clearwater, Field of Flowers. I thought it was strange that she had taken the time to write this down, and that whatever these words meant caused enough panic in her to make her want to leave. Several weeks had passed and the strange happenings involving the old woman had all but left my mind. That was until I went on a family outing with my daughter, downtown. On our way to the park we passed by the mental institution. I never noticed the horse statue that sat in the lobby before. It was at that moment I remembered the note I found that night. I spent the rest of the day looking for something that could have coincided with the words on the note, but I found nothing. The next day I drove to that institution and took a look around for myself. It wasn't long before I stumbled upon an empty room with a painting on the door. Depicted in this painting was a beautiful field of white flowers at sunset. I asked the nurse who used to be in this room, and she said it had been empty for a couple of months now. She said that the last person to have occupied that room was a delusional schizophrenic who passed away. Now the room is used for storage. I then asked if it was okay if I took a look inside. She obliged and I walked in. The only thing left in the room were some old boxes labeled decorations and furniture that had all been stacked neatly against the wall. As I walked closer, I noticed there had been something scratched into the wood paneling behind one of the boxes. From the looks of it, this carving must have been there for years. It read, "One day you'll discover the truth." This was quite different from the phrases I was used to hearing from the old woman, but I assumed it had to be from the same man she had spoken of. Strangely, I felt this message was meant for me. I couldn't explain it. Feeling dissatisfied with what I had discovered and not getting any closure on the issue, I returned to my apartment. The complex in which I resided overlooked a small lake, and I would frequently take walks there to gather my thoughts. That evening I did just that, and I was the only one there. As I was overlooking the clearer waters, it hit me. I was where I was supposed to be for the final words of the note I found. This made me feel uneasy, and I decided to return home. That's when I heard a crazed man's voice.